Hey, UNbothered family. So today we are going to be addressing the second episode of Dark Brotherhood. Today's episode, we're going to be discussing Skull and Bones, New Connecticut. Now, every year, 15 Yale University seniors are tapped to enter the ranks of Skull and Bones, one of the most mysterious secret societies on the planet. Skull and Bones, as Esquire writer Ron Rosenbaum puts it, is devoted to converting the idle progeny of the ruling class into morally serious leaders of the establishment. Skull and Bones dates back to 1832 when William H. Russell, a student at Yale, co-created it after returning from Germany. Inspired by the country's occult secret societies, the club began as a Fox occult group that worshiped Elogia, a fake goddess of eloquence. But they would quickly become one of the few secret societies that run the world. The amount of famous Skull and Bones members is staggering. And if you go take a look at any brand names in your kitchen, like Kellogg or Pillsbury, you'll be looking at the names of some of the oldest families within their ranks. There's no doubt a myriad of Skull and Bones secrets. What I'm about to tell you are only a few. Now, the initiation rituals of the Skull and Bones are some of the most interesting parts of their society, not because of how weird they are, and they are very weird, but because no one's actually sure which ritual is true and which is an exaggeration. There are multiple stories having to do with an initiation that takes place inside of a coffin. In some versions, initiates lie in a coffin while they're carried through a crypt with bonesmen chanting, "Reborn, reborn." And in other versions, initiates are made to lie unclothed in a coffin and describe their personal history in a room full of their brothers. There are also stories of having to jump in a pile of mud or maybe wrestle another initiate in a pile of mud. And who can forget the rumor that initiates are given a gift of $15,000 and a guaranteed financial security just for being tapped to join the Skull and Bones Society? These wildly different stories about the rituals function as a way to make sure everything seems ridiculous while allowing everything to seem awesome. There's a rumor that some members of Skull and Bones are given special assignments that involve grave robbing, and that one of those assignments was given to Prescott Bush, father of H.W. Bush. His assignment? Dig up the bones of Geronimo. According to legend, in 1918, Bush and a few other bonesmen went to Oklahoma, where they dug up the warrior's skull, 2 bones, and some riding gear from his grave, and put it on display in the tomb, the group's meeting place in New Haven, Connecticut. On February 17th of 2009, descendants of Geronimo filed a federal lawsuit against Skull and Bones in order to force them to return the warrior's bones so he can rest. Geronimo's great-grandson, Harlan Geronimo, said, "I believe strongly from my heart that his spirit was never released." The campaign for the 2004 presidential election was a horrible slog. Not only was America in the beginning of what would become a forever war in the Middle East, but it was becoming apparent that President W. Bush was not the best person to be steering the ship. Unfortunately, his opponent, John Kerry, wasn't really any special. Aside from action on Vietnam, thing Bush managed to avoid. Two weren't all that different. Both owe money in family. They're quadrilogists and were both members of Skull and Bones. This isn't to say that their presidencies would have been exactly the same. Bonesmen don't all think or vote the same way. But they do both have the interest of their fellow bonesmen at heart. During the 2004 campaign, both men were asked about Skull and Bones, and both demurred in different ways. John Kerry simply said, "It's a secret," while W said, "So secret, I can't say anything more." Skull and Bones was founded in the height of the antebellum era, and despite its northern location from the very beginning, has had its roots in racism and elitism. Originally founded by William Huntington Russell and Alphonso Taft, the former, who was inspired by occultist groups he'd encountered on a trip to Germany. These same occultists influenced the rise of the Nazi Party and were steeped in eugenics and one-race philosophies. Of course, Skull and Bones also excluded women and very much catered to the white male elite, 1% of Yale's historical student body. According to a piece in The Atlantic, this type of exclusion may be changing as the club seeks to diversify itself even while remaining secretive and exclusive. What comes first, the destiny of greatness or initiation into Skull and Bones? For many people, it seems that being inducted into this secret society provides a green light for the rest of your life. It doesn't hurt that the society is tapping members from Yale, one of the most prestigious universities in America. And rather than choose people at random, they lean heavily on legacies, peoples whose parents were members. There have been multiple presidents inducted into Skull and Bones: William Howard Taft, George H.W. Bush, George W. Bush, as well as many CIA officials, Fortune 500 CEOs, and Henry Luce, the founder of Time magazine. It's no secret that members of Skull and Bones not only go on to be important, they go on to shape the world. A semi-occult, secretive brotherhood like Skull and Bones needs a semi-occult, secretive lair where they can hold their initiation ceremonies and all-night salons. In the early 19th century, Skull and Bones rented out various on-campus halls where they would hold late-night discussions. But in 1856, they finally constructed the tomb, a windowless brownstone where Bonesmen would meet privately every Thursday and Sunday. No one knows exactly what's inside the tomb, but there have been a few expeditions inside by curious outsiders. In 1876, a group calling itself the Order of Fire and Flood, named so because of what they used to break into the tomb, wrote a pamphlet about what they found inside. Rooms outfitted with black and red velvet pictograms on the walls, and photos of an alternate society in Germany. A few years later, another group broke in and found a gruesome scene. On the west wall, hung among other pictures, an old engraving representing an open burial vault, in which, on a stone slab, rest 4 human skulls, grouped about a fool's cap and bells, an open book, several mathematical instruments, and beggar's scrip, and a royal crown. That's pretty gob for a group of rich kids, don't you think? Well, outside of the rumors that persist about the secret society, many people believe that because, due to the amount of members who are part of the government, who are inside Skull and Bones, that the members dictate a plan for the world from inside the tomb. The biggest conspiracy theory that the Bonesmen have helped pull off was the assassination of JFK. Much of the proof of this theory relies on the fact that in 1963, George H.W. Bush was the president of the Zapata Offshore Oil Company, a job that saw him going back and forth between Texas and Miami on a regular basis. He allegedly used his time in Miami to recruit Cuban nationals who would be happy to assassinate the president. Many conspiracy theorists believe that the Skull and Bones was created as a way to build a modern Illuminati that would serve as a way for the 1% to meet in secret and plan out a dystopia lorded over by Yale alumni. The craziest thing that Skull and Bones supposedly did was put the Manhattan Project into motion. When new members officially join Skull and Bones, they take on a new name that their fellow Bonesmen will know them as for the rest of their lives. Some Bonesmen pass down their nicknames to younger recruits, like Louis Lapham from Harper's Magazine did with his nickname, Sancho Panza, when he passed it to Tex McRae, a PR specialist. Bonesmen who were the most actually active received the nickname Magog, and anyone who was a varsity football captain was known as Boaz. Some Bonesmen are allowed to choose their own nicknames. Allegedly, George W. Bush was one of these lucky devils, but because he couldn't think of anything, his fellow Bonesmen referred to him as Temporary, and the name stuck. One of the most interesting things about Skull and Bones is that no one in the organization even talks about it. They live with it. So the fascination that everyone else has with the secret society obviously isn't there. And whatever they actually do inside the tomb can't be talked about. So there's no way to know what's happening. The members' dedication to secrecy is so ingrained that the mere mention of the phrase Skull and Bones will clear the room of anyone who's been inducted. Or at least, that's the rumor. In some cases, when escape is impossible, they may just spin their conversational wheels until whomever pressing them changes the topic. If there were any rumors about Skull and Bones that made the men seem less horrifying, it's this one. According to Esquire writer Ron Rosenbaum, there's a room inside the tomb that's covered in license plates from across the country. Rosenbaum, an author who's written extensively about the secret society, says that he discovered this after a woman wrote into him to say that she had been secreted into the tomb one night by a bonesman who wanted to impress her. Once inside, the bonesman showed her the room and explained that the plates all had the number 322 stamped on them. Bones members were supposed to confiscate any license plate they found with the sacred numbers on it for safekeeping in the room of license plates. When Esquire writer Ron Rosenbaum went looking into the Skull and Bones for a 1976 piece, he had trouble finding anyone who talked to him. The few people he could find were open to chatting with him reprised again after this was listed. One friend of Oldman allegedly wrote on where he did his game for exceeding the workman counsel of his bank, and that he would never get a line of credit again, the anonymous man said. They don't like people tampering and buying. The power of the bones is credible. They've got hands on every level of power in the country. You'll see. It's like in Mafia. Remember, they're a secret society too. As you continue to listen about these Skull and Bones, here's something to keep in mind. You will never be invited to Deer Island. And that's okay, because if you were invited to the secret island owned by the Russell Trust Association, which the business name for the Skull and Bones Society created in 1850, you would likely be sent by court or tangled up areas of hated, sweats, and thrown in a fancy prison. Deer Island is a hot spot in the Alexandria Bay, New York, that plays host to picnics and getaways where Skull and Bones members, young and old, meet to plan the future and commingle. For members of old line families, Deer Island is probably small potatoes. These are people who are used to vacationing in far-off places. But to new inductees, the experience on Deer Island offers the eye-opening revelation that they're now rubbing elbows with the most powerful people in the world. That those people want them around for their specific talents, and that it's possible to become one of these very, very powerful people. If you thought that part was interesting, follow me. Let's get back to these rituals. Now, see, on a Saturday of April 14th, for the first time ever, the long secret rite was witnessed by a team of outsiders, including from the writer I'm about to read from. So, using high-tech night vision video equipment, able to peer through the room into the inner courtyard of the Skull and Bones, the observer team witnessed the following. The George W. effect. Intoxicated by renewed proximity to presidential power, a robed groomsman posing as George W. Horton initiates an eerie, accurate text scroll. I'm gonna read like Rain Gore, and I'm gonna like Al Gore. Privileged Skull and Bone members mocked the assault on Abner Loiman by crying out repeatedly, "Take that plunger out of my backside." Skull and Bones members seen assaults at initiates as they first known his soul at deep in years. Members did out the tableau of a throat-cutting ritual unaliving. It's important to remember, and this is not some fraternity initiation. It is an initiation far significant term power of the United States, and that of the culture. Bushes are the wasp Corleones, as the ever more stingily Washop Maureen Dowd has suggested, and this is how their made men are made. It's an initiation ceremony that has bonded diplomats, media moguls, bankers, and spies into a lifelong, multi-generational fellowship, far more influential than any fraternity. It was, and still, remains the heart of the American establishment. Further revelations turned up by the Observer Investigation Unit were as follows. The words to the secret Skull and Bones death mantra, copies of the Skull and Bones tax returns obtained through Freedmen of Information Act requests raise questions about the legitimacy of the secret society's claim to charitable tax-exempt deduction status, particularly relevant considering recent criticism of the Bush plan for filling a coordinated emerged in course of initiation ceremony for George used to send president. observer possible expedition had its inception several months prior to the investigation, with a phone call from Peggy Adler, the research associate on a previous Skull and Bones piece in The Observer. She is the demon investigator and former Iran-Contra committee staffer who, among other coups, cross-referenced corporate boards to crack the RTA code, the corporate shell game, by which the corporate shell of the Skull and Bones Society, the Russell Trust Association, shielded its paper trail from prying eyes by changing its name to RTA Inc. Ms. Adler said she had been approached by a member of Yale community who wanted to share with us a remarkable coup of its own. He had found a way the other year in April of 2000 to audio tape the Skull and Bones initiation ceremony. And he wanted to know if they'd be able to investigate. And so one afternoon in December, shortly after the Bush electoral victory had been certified, the writer met with the intrepid fellow. He booted up his laptop and let the writer listen to the sounds of a ceremony that had been the subject of fevered speculation for nearly 2 centuries now. Of course, there is more to Skull and Bones than the mystical mumbo-jumbo of its rituals. The rituals are less important than the relationships, the bonds of power and influence that develop between Skull and Bones initiates after they graduate. But the relationships are first forged by the rituals, and the fact that the founders of Time Inc. and the CIA, as well as several secret societies and several secretaries of states and national security advisors, the men who made the decision to drop the Hiroshima bomb, invade the Bay of Pigs, and plunge us into Vietnam, the Tafts, the Bundys, the Buckleys, the Harrimans, the Lovitts, all took part in this initiation ritual. It may have something to do with the real world power behind those bonds, the unspoken understanding, the comfort level with the clandestine, the nods and winks with which power is exercised. The initiation ceremony begins the process of inculcating into the elect of the elite the same mystical sense of mission that allowed the British Old Boy Network to rule the worldwide empire. So, yes, according to this, my Yale source had found a previously unexploited perch from which to record the sounds of the ceremonies. And this is allegedly what they heard. It says, yes, the death mantra. Here it is. The 3-line Skull and Bones initiation ritual theme that has bound 3 presidents, including a recent one. The hangsman equals death. The devil equals death. Death equals death. Most of the speculative lore about the Skull and Bones ritual has centered on its death asphyxiation. Beyond the obvious skull and crossbones insignia, of course, the most persistent story is that initiates spend their senior year in the basement crypt of the Bones tomb, taking turns lying in a coffin and in 2 long psychodrama or biographical sessions in coffins, recount their personal and history to other ones that are on those they best prepare their destiny as of the ruling class. Now, I can go on and on about the Skull and Bones. So, but I'm not. Unless you guys want me to. But I think we're going to move on. I think this is pretty much all we need to know about the Skull and Bones. I don't want anyone knocking at my door. Anyone.